Hello, welcome to Film Crack, where we have some film crack about some films that have fallen through the cracks. See, it's quite a clever title, really. You thought it was just a bunch of noises, but it's not. It's carefully thought out and considered. And joining me, as always, and I'm Clive Davis, by the way, and joining me is
Nicolas O'Sheacon.
All right, Nick, how is it going?
Things are good. Things are good. I feel like a little tired. It's been a long week back at work, but I'm excited to be here and talking about this 5-episode long TV series you found for us to watch.
Yes.
So I'm going to get you to kind of explain how and why this is worthy of Film Crack in terms of, you know, where you can find it to see it, because it's one of these things that's not available on any kind of DVD or.
No, this is, yes, as our remit goes, we try and tackle things that like we said, falling through the cracks a little bit format wise and in terms of people's awareness of. And this is something maybe more so than anything we've done so far and might ever do, I think, is really falls into the category of this should be like on school syllabuses or something.
Yes. Yes.
So we're talking about a BBC, rather than a film, we're talking about a BBC TV series, a documentary series with some reconstruction drama sequences from 1995 called The Last Machine, and is hosted by Terry Gilliam, who you can see here on I also have the book.
Oh, you got the book. Okay, awesome.
So this is the book that the BFI put out that the series was based on by Ian Christie. And unlike some other, for example, the Kenneth Clarke's Civilization or Bronowski's The Ascent of Man, when you buy the books of those, they're basically transcripts of the scripts. And I thought that's what this would be, because as well, the chapters are the same episodes as the series. But actually, it's not just a transcript of the scripts of the series. So I would also recommend getting the book as well, because for instance, it has like pocket profiles of like Paul Wagner.
Awesome.
And who else has it got in there? Vladislav Sterovich, I guess you pronounce it. It's got like, you know, little retrospectives. But it's quite a nice little companion piece. But we are talking specifically about the 5-part series, and this aired. Had you seen this before, by the way?
No.
Okay.
This is the first viewing for me.
Right, and this is, you can view it as well. We're not deleted. Well, we are a bit, but in this case, you can actually track it down. It is on YouTube. Someone's put it up in its entirety on YouTube, so you can see it. But the reason it's here is because there's no VHS, there's no DVD, there's no Laserdisc, there's no wax cylinder, which would be,
impressive. Yeah. Yes, if they had gone to the trouble.
I'm waiting for the magic lantern version.
That would be ideal, really.
So this
is taped off of Australian TV, it seems to me.
Yeah. So obviously it was syndicated around the world. I wouldn't be surprised if it had played in Canada or the US on a television.
I would imagine. Because you do get some kind of video artifacts. You're like, you know, they're obviously taken from somebody's VHS tapes right off the air of whenever it showed.
Right.
So you know, some of the episodes have a little bit of. It would be wonderful to see it in pristine quality. And as we get into this, but a huge number of the films that I'm becoming aware of, in some cases for the first time, I want to see whatever's left of them. You know.
Yes. Yeah. So
we'll get into that.
Yeah. So I originally saw this when it first aired. In 1995, which was oddly enough, I was talking with Ron about this in a recent episode of Magic Morning Wood, because we were talking about The Seventh Seal and Bergman films, and what I realized in retrospect was what a heady year for, well, not just me, but I'm talking about me, so it's me. But lots of viewers, 1995 was, because 1995 was the centenary of, basically the creation of cinema in 1995. And to commemorate it, the BBC not only had this season of the 100 best films of all time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But they also had this whole series of documentaries, the Century of Cinema series, where a bunch of different filmmakers did a documentary about their country's cinematic history. So there was like one on China, there was one on Iran, there was one on, all these different countries had all these. And I suppose at the same time, the American version would have been that documentary series that Martin Scorsese did, the personal history.
Right.
So that was, I think that was on as well. And there was this series as well. Mm-hmm. So I was seeing all this stuff, all in the same 12 months. I'd seen all these documentaries about that. Plus I saw more or less 100 amazing films from around the world. Mm-hmm. So 1995, my little brain was just,
wow.
Plus, 16 years old. So, lots of other stuff going on. Upstairs and downstairs, right?
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
So quite the year.
Stimulating year.
I'm surprised I survived it. Now, as a man in his 40s looking back, it just sounds exhausting to me. But as a 16-year-old, I guess at 15 into 16, I took it in my stride, I suppose.
I will say though, and this is only tangentially connected, but when we moved to Canada in '89, I remember being hugely disappointed by the fact, in Ireland, and I assume in England and in Wales, like around about say Christmas time, right? Mm-hmm. They will run, tons of movies, right? Yeah. They will be kind of like, like anything that's kind of, so when I was a kid, things that had maybe shown in the cinema a couple of years before, but certainly when I was a younger kid, pre-VHS, it might be my only chance to see,
the big Christmas film, right? Like
like Star Wars or whatever it was that they were showing on TV. Yeah,
and of course the James Bond films as well was a staple of Boxing Day or something, or
Yeah, and it would run like all the channels would kind of would run multiple movies over multiple days, like the 2 weeks off Christmas holidays. You got movies every day.
I remember until I was older and I started buying it myself because I was became a little film snob, and the Radio Times was like the only place that told you when films had been edited for television.
Oh, okay.
So until I started buying that later on, I remember when I was a kid, at Christmas time was the only time we would buy like a Radio Times, because you'd have the free listings in the TV papers, right? But I remember at Christmas time, you had to get the Radio Times or the TV Times. Was your family because because it was a boom. There was like 2 weeks of just films, right? It was just
So Canada, the US, nothing.
All right.
So and so two things happened. The regular TV schedule or the regular TV kind of stuff, that all kind of peters out, right? So and then they don't show any movies. So it was just like soul deadening. It was like nothing on TV for 2 solid weeks, instead of it being the most glorious time for a little film lovers. So I would imagine that this in 1995, because I was certainly alive,
right?
And I don't remember seeing any of this on Canadian or American TV.
Right.
I mean, PBS probably might have done some stuff, but that they would be in glaring isolation. Nobody else was marking the moment. So
anyway, I guess I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time, right? So I remember seeing this, and it left an impression on me to the extent that for my student film, when I did a crash course film course, I copied one of the ideas from in the first episode. There's a film from 1906, a British one actually, called The Motorist, which I'd read about in another book as well. It's basically a guy driving along in his car decides to just drive off the road and just drive off into space.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought,
Yes.
I love that. Like that, just the
Mhm.
idea that you can do that is something that cinema doesn't do anymore, right? Because we've imposed on these little like rules and stuff. And a
Mhm.
film of this time was just, yeah, why not? Like
It's all play.
Yeah. So I remember
Right.
trying. I never completed the film because it was actually quite ambitious, and like I said, lots of things going on upstairs, downstairs in those days.
Yes.
Not as much as I would have liked downstairs, obviously, but so yes, so across 5 episodes, Terry Gilliam, who's the perfect person to introduce this.
He's an excellent host.
Yeah, and he wears lots of different costumes, and they've gone to the trouble of making proper scenes. It's not just a narrate, like he wears these outlandish costumes and he becomes the face of the man in the moon, as in the Gentleman, A Trip to the Moon, and and he's clearly relishing talking about this period in time.
Yes. Yeah, he's fantastic, and it reminds you that he was almost under. I know he was obviously primarily their animator, but he was almost underutilized as a performer by the Monty Python troupe, because he clearly has the chops, but
well, yes and no, because on the other hand, he does basically only have one funny face, which is this one.
Yes.
He does that same one in this.
Yes, that's true.
It's the one face he does.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't have the range, but no, he's you're right. He's excellent in this.
Yeah, well, he just suits the material. I was surprised actually that it's almost as if Ian Christie's been left behind. You could almost believe that Terry Gilliam had
wondered
the whole concept himself.
Particularly the kind of the like whatever interstitial segments, the dramatic recreations they get stranger and stranger, and sometimes are mixing fantasy characters in with actual historical figures, and they seem more a part of a Terry Gilliam movie than So I wondered how much of a hand he had in, or if they wrote it thinking, well, if he's going to host this, we will try to make it seem more like a Terry Gilliam.
Right. Yeah. So like you say, there are these docudrama where they take writers of the time and things they have to say, like Maxim Gorky, what he thought about cinema, Oscar Wilde as well, like what he thought, and then they'll
have Toad from Wind in the Willows as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that was cool. Yeah, as a example of a hit and run driver, which yes, I suppose he was. I never really thought about it. He pretty much was. So across 5 chapters, each one does have a kind of theme, and we might touch on each theme. But overarchingly, I would say what this series does is, number one, it puts it in the context of the time, in terms of just overall outside of cinema as well. The tail end of the Industrial Revolution and things like railroads, automobiles, flying machines, balloons, and the literary world stuff like Jules Verne and stuff like. So it places all this stuff.
And future, like art movements, futurism and Dadaism. It kind of it touches on all that. So, and the title of the show itself, The Last Machine. It comes from the idea that the film camera, the movie camera, is the last machine of the Victorian age. It's the last great, step, I guess.
Right, and also it goes back and forth a little bit in terms of because I think now we tend to think of, oh yes, there's the film camera, it was invented by Edison or whatever, and that's it. But what it does quite a good job of explaining how early on. Different, it goes back to variations on not only the film camera but also the pre-film camera things like magic lanterns and things like. I was particularly interested to hear about the Phantasmagoria shows, which seemed like basically live spook shows.
Yeah, they sounded awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to go to one of those. And magic lantern shows and just these kind of weird, basically pre-film film, and it really puts it in your mind like. At the time, I don't think anyone would have thought like, oh, cinema was invented now. It was like a progressive thing, and then looking back, you realize, oh, that's when it was kind of solidified as something that you projected on a wall at like Nickelodeon's, and also it goes on to explain how even that as well, like how they went through a period of being like dingy dens of iniquity until someone cleaned it up and put it in big theaters and made foyers, and so it's taking something that seems very niche or cursory and really expands it out to the point where at the end of 5 episodes, I was like, oh man, do I now have to devote my life to just watching films prior to 1915? Because there's so much stuff, right? Even though a lot of it is lost, a lot of it isn't as well, right? Judging by some of the amazing footage in this. I mean, across these 5 episodes, from the clips they show, I put together quite a list of things I want to see.
Yes, yeah. And years ago, I remember ordering tapes back. I was doing a master's thesis on images of the anarchist in cinema. I never finished it, but
my short film.
Yes, yeah. But I remember ordering VHS cassettes that would just have 40 or 50 D.W. Griffith shorts on there, and there'd be 6 of them, including a mad bomb throwing mustachioed anarchist. And I was poring over these old just film listings, because they would often sometimes the movies may not exist, but you could still get a brief description of what the content was, and there's an endless amount of that stuff. Right. Existing, stuff that exists and that doesn't. But that first episode, it's called Space and Time Machine, and I loved the fact that it seemed like a lot of the earliest movies. I mean, the one that everyone remembers is or it's often credited as being the first moving picture, is the train coming into the train station, right? But then there's this mania right away for train movies. And it's just
and parody.
So it'd be exactly right away. So I mean, I love that. It's almost like we strap a GoPro to the front of a train and we kind of take it through the tunnel and and down a winding. That's cool. But then then very shortly, people are like, oh, I'm getting bored of these train movies. So they come up with the first inserts. Right. So they film these little scenes of either comedy or kind of sexual stuff going on inside the car. They can cut them into the train travel-on movie. And my favorite one of those was the comedy sex mashup one right away. Of the the one,
the racist one as well. Don't forget the racist element, where he is the one where he's tricked into kissing the black maid first, right? And it's he's sputtering, and then it's the baby's bottom.
His arse. Yeah, kissing the baby's ass. That was awesome. Well, just how right away this almost idea of that people want to see this, and so you know what I mean, and then other people hop on the bandwagon and do their variations.
I suppose if there's one thing missing from it, I mean, they do address it a little bit, but I think, and I understand why they because it's a kind of another thing. But if you were to add one more episode to this, I suppose it would be early pornography and stags and smokers, right?
I mean, they do talk about it, but
they do a little bit, yeah.
Great, but and then there's what was the Sheffield train crime movie, Daylight Robbery,
right?
Being, that's the first crime movie, right there, I guess.
Yeah. And in America, there's the W. D. Griffith gangster version, the Musketeers of Pig Alley.
I was fascinated by that.
I think we're just gonna jump around here, right? That's probably the best way to, because I just realized the only way I think I'm going to be able to get through this is just look at my notes and then go, and then there was.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Sure. There's one thing that jumped at me. There was Georges Méliès, is that how you say his name? The guy who did all the early kind of fantasy.
Yeah, Méliès
film work, right? Yeah.
Incidentally, the good thing about the one we were talking about, it's a shame that there isn't a Blu-ray version of this that actually should be handed out to schools, I think, because it would be such a great educational tool, I think. You can now get because I own them, a couple of box sets which collects pretty much everything Méliès ever did.
Okay.
Or
Right.
what survives. And if you get it, it's fascinating. But also, I mean, I would recommend watching it in small increments, because it's very like the amount of things that have decapitated heads, like using his technique of, like, he was mad for decapitated head tricks, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, right? So yeah, like do like a few shorts an evening or something, rather than I tried to sit down with it all in one go at one point, and no, that's not, you kind of lose sight of it.
Because there's an image in that first episode of a train going off into space, and I was like, wow, that's, I mean, because that comes up many times later on. That's certainly Galaxy Express 999, the Japanese, but then there's another like Milky Way Express thing that predates that. I think that's also a Japanese novel or something.
Right. The Night on the Galactic Railroad.
Yeah. It's just weird to see these things. I assume that's maybe the seed for this, or maybe lots of people had the idea of trains in space. I don't know, but
speaking of Méliès as well, one of my all-time favorites is A Trip to the Moon, or Voyage to the Moon, or Le Voyage, which is just amazing. And for those of you who think you haven't seen it, you have seen it. If not, and if you haven't seen it, you've seen that Smashing Pumpkins music video that.
Oh God, yes.
You did, right? Do you remember that?
No, I actually forgot about that. Yeah.
So this is basically some Victorians go to the moon in a
big bullet.
In a big bullet that lands in the eye of the man on the moon. They don't have spacesuits. They have umbrellas or parasols. And then in the most cute ending, to get back to Earth, they just have to push it off the edge, and it just falls back down to Earth. It's great. It's one of those. It's just pure cinematic. It's always been one of my favorite films. And I remember the Martin Scorsese movie Hugo, which is about Jules Verne later on in life, kind of a bit of a what's the word, speculative fiction, right? He ended up, it was true, he did work at this train station, the Montparnasse train station, running a toy.
Yes,
and if you've seen, I don't know if you've seen Hugo, but
no, but yes.
But one of the joys for me of seeing Hugo on a big screen is they show A Trip to the Moon, or clips from the moon.
Oh, nice.
So it was the only time I'd ever seen it like on a big screen. And it was wonderful. Because that is one of the best films ever made.
Yeah, the sense of play, the sense of wonder, the imagination on display, and also the trick photography so early is just, I mean, he truly was a master. And it's kind of sad that it seems like, his career didn't fully pan out, I guess. So he wasn't able to continue to do what he was doing.
Rediscovered, and people were just amazed as well, apparently, like, wow,
Oh yes, yeah. As you would be.
But what's great about the series as well is it also shows you that as amazing and important a figure as he was, Méliès was not the only game in town, right? Like,
yes,
other filmmakers. I was thinking of you specifically.
I'm sure you're about to talk about the guy who made stop motion
insects. Yes.
Yeah, that I was
so excited. You would be entranced.
So excited to see that.
I'd seen some of those as well. Like, I've seen The Cameraman's Revenge and some of the other ones, but I don't know. There could also be a box set of this. You could be able to get all his stuff in high definition. I don't know, but
I would love. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely. I made a big note because I need to see whatever exists. I also love that he's introduced, because like apparently he had wanted to be. Well, I think Terry Gilliam said something along the lines of, like, as we all, do, like, he wanted to make videos of our movies of stag beetles fighting. Like, well, I mean, it's true for me, and maybe for Terry Gilliam, but and then that he realized that it was going to be easier to just make these beautifully articulated and very realistic looking stop motion versions of insects, and then slowly they become more human like, and that stuff was just all
also fascinating to see a very early Eisenstein version of the Potemkin story.
Yes.
That was fascinating. The Boer War reenacted in Earl's Court and New Jersey.
Yes, and the Boxer Rebellion shot in somebody's front garden in Howth or whatever it was.
Yeah. President McKinley, the execution of President McKinley's assassin,
Leon Czolgosz.
Leon Czolgosz, yeah, in the electric chair. And I was watching that and I was thinking, this is Faces of Death, like 70 years before Faces of Death. That was amazing. And I'm wondering as well at the time, like when that showed, like how forthright would they have been about saying that it was a reenactment? Well, because you had people, you know, in the 80s who believed the Faces of Death stuff
was real. That was an interesting piece to me. Like I didn't realize, because it kind of the whole like William McKinley getting killed, right, getting shot, and then basically was it Roosevelt who was
Roosevelt,
Teddy was his kind of vice president, and how he becomes the first movie president,
right,
who becomes very interested in making sure that his exploits are caught on film.
There was even a relative, is it Kermit Roosevelt? I seem to remember being an early film star.
Okay.
As well, actually, he's like in some serials or something. Yeah, and then again, speaking of stuff that you can now like see, so there's the whole stuff about Scott of the Antarctic's expedition being filmed.
Right.
You can see those now. You can see both 90 degrees south and the Great White Silence, I think, there's a restored BFI DVD of that, which is just stunning. And I mean, seriously, I mean, if you have access to this stuff, you could spend years of your life just watching films from
I would watch
years
I would happily watch like 12 hours of cars blowing up.
Right.
And people falling off of cars and people falling under cars.
I really like the one as well. The guy who gets run over by a steamroller. That's amazing. The one, fucking amazing. Those Awful Hats. Do you remember this one?
Yes, the big crane that comes and picks up the ladies.
And steals women's large hats off them in the cinema, I guess, in early satire. That was amazing. I'd love to see. I mean, I'm sure that all of those Awful Hats doesn't run much longer, but
yeah,
still, I really need to see Those Awful Hats. It's just such a great title as well. What else we got? What else? And yes, the footage as well, like the newsreel footage that they have, like what's her name? David, the suffragette woman who ran out in front of the horses.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, it reminded me of. I mean, it's funny with McKinley. I was like, well, there was almost like a Zapruder film of McKinley's assassination, right? And then with her running under the legs of that there was actually this kind of like news footage,
right,
from the very beginning of like. I mean, what's amazing to me is that almost every use we came up with for the camera was figured out in the first 10 years.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's quite amazing to think like whether it's pornography, whether it's news related, whether it's kind of comedy, action. I mean, like the stunts as well, because again, it brought to mind Hong Kong action cinema. These are not trained stunt people.
No,
these are not.
No one inspired Jackie Chan more than Buster Keaton, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, still to this day, there's stunts in Buster Keaton films that stuntmen watch and go, literally, how did he do that? Like, not only is he fucking crazy, like, how did he even? One, it's even like a throwaway gag in one of his films where a bus goes past and he grabs hold of the pole and it pulls him like. So he's like horizontal off screen.
Yes.
And no one can figure out how he did it. Like, how the hell did he actually do that to look like that? That's insane.
Yes. Yeah, so it was exciting for me to see. You know, there's a really interesting moment where they talk about how, and you talked earlier about this idea that cinemas have become quite quickly became very seedy places, right?
Right.
You have these kind of crass, kind of like very like lots of violence, lots of kind of like sort of sex and sexuality.
I was
and
thinking
then,
about that, my visits to the Pink theaters.
yeah, and they're kind of a
Yeah.
dark place, and there are, you know, and they're talking about how you know, hookers basically use them to kind of stay warm and to kind of to trawl. And then so they then move over to, you know, they're going to build these more fancy theaters, but then they need a fancier kind of film, right? So suddenly you get into this thing of like, oh, now movies are based on lofty works of literature, or they're historical reenactments. But what's really fascinating is that they also then start hiring stage actors, and immediately the films get crap. And I was like, wow, actors ruin movies, because before that there were just people doing awesome stuff,
and like this as well, right? Like not worrying about giving a dramatic reading, or
but suddenly, like, they're so stiff and stagey, and the action is staged in a very stagey kind of way. And I was like, oh man, they've ruined cinema really quick, you know, like, by bringing in actors.
It's fascinating as well. Speaking of those of passion plays and stuff, you know, they go to Palestine to film, like one of the from the manger to the
the spectacle stuff came, like, you know, like doing locations, you know, like, it wasn't good enough to shoot the Boxer Rebellion in somebody's English garden, you know.
To the point where they show clips from a film that looks fascinating, a Danish film from 1913 called Atlantis, which is, you know, it's just 1913, it's only 1913, but it looks incredibly sophisticated. Like, just into, not just on what you're seeing on screen, but like the themes of it and the things, the way that that it's mature, that it's not just a glorified stage show anymore, that they're actually using cinema to, and like, to your point, it is amazing, like way before, you know, before you're getting into the sound era, it's like, oh, in the first, whatever, 35 years of film, they've done pretty much everything there is to, including sound. It's just that they used phonographs and stuff. And stuff like that. It really, you do have to wonder, like, oh, did film peak like 100 years ago? Like, is it all downhill from there, you know?
But then there's certain experiments they did right at the beginning that I'd love to see again, like the idea of a 360-degree cinema, right? Because I've seen one. There's one in Winnipeg.
Oh, okay.
It's in the Human Rights Museum there.
It's got panopticon of cinema.
Yeah, it's basically got I guess it has a digital projectors that project an image that completely envelops you, but it's used for kind of like for history lessons. But you could it'd be pretty awesome to have a movie where you are literally the center of the action, where there's stuff going on behind you that you can't see. You know,
you could reverse. You could do like two versions of it as well, right? You could do like a double where they show pornography, and then you watch the pornography, and then there's people watching you, maybe watching you, so you don't know whether it's safe enough to masturbate or not. In a panopticon cinematic,
fraught experience.
Well, that's what they tried to do with prisons at a certain point, right? Was the whole idea that, well, someone might be watching, but you don't know.
And then, you know, like there's anthropology movies that, you know, come quite that whole you mentioned that the Potemkin with throwing the dummies off,
right?
You know, and it was interesting, like, you know, there was almost I thought, like, this is early Saigon. This is like dramatic recreations of stories that are pulled from them, you know.
Yeah, and much better. And towards the kind of tail end, it's getting nearer to what we think of as, you know, modern cinema as well. You start, it's still amazing to consider how early those like those French serials like the Fantomas and Le Vampire and those things, Zygoma the eel, which was one I didn't know about, actually.
That was great.
Yeah, and they mentioned the Mabuse, you know, Fritz Lang's Mabuse as well, which parts of that are extraordinary as well. And yeah, because I think in general, as film fans, we tend to think of that stuff, which was like a generation later in a way, like the silent features and Metropolis and stuff like that. We tend to, we tend to think of that as like the birth of cinema, kind of like that's the stuff you go back to, like, to see where it all comes from. But you're like, no, those are already like a plateau to which there's this proto, and I think because a lot of it is short in length and stuff, it has less of an utilitarian place today, right? It's difficult to maybe put it into retrospectives or make film festivals based around it, because people are used to a certain amount of time. You know, if you pay for a film ticket, you expect at least like an hour or close to an hour or something, right? So I think that's, as prosaic as that sounds, that might be one of the reasons some of this stuff is slightly relegated to, you know, box sets or people who are, you know, have niche interests, is because it's difficult to kind of program it for a modern audience in a way, like only this length, or, you know, sometimes some of these surviving fragments are literally just seconds. They don't even make a minute, right? But what a minute, like
right.
I mean, just the 30 seconds or whatever, even if it's that they showed of those awful hats, made me smile for the rest of the day, right? Anytime I was feeling bad, I just think, those awful hats. It's so simple, but it's so great, right? Yeah, so and again, if another thing I would recommend, if you're like a filmmaker, if you're a wannabe filmmaker and you've kind of been pummeled by, you know, how difficult it is to make a film, you've decided, if I put this on the back burner, filmmaking might not be for me, watch this series and it just reignites, like, everything seems possible, doesn't it? It's just like, oh man, yeah, that's the spirit, right? Like that's exactly what it should be.
Just go and do it, you know.
It's,
you know, I think
it's the punk of cinema. It's the three chords of cinema, right?
Yeah, as I said, there's such a great sense of play, just the feeling of people have got this new medium and they're going to try to just figure out all the ways you can have fun with it.
And even stuff like they show these like early X-ray films, and we're used to X-rays now. You go to the doctor, but then if you see it in if you just show, it's something magical about seeing an X-ray, like a movie. Wow, a dancing skeleton, cool. You know, no, it's honestly, if because obviously when this film was made in 1995, the film elements were what they were, and it's good for it. But I wonder if one of the reasons there isn't a Blu-ray presentation, other than maybe rights as well, is I'm wondering if some of these films haven't been restored to a good enough level so that there's a kind of a uniform kind of, I don't know, because a lot of this stuff, like I said, because it's not exhibited necessarily, I mean, it may exist, it might have all been restored, it might, you know, it might be, but it's just sitting in vaults, and occasionally, you know, these box sets, like I said, the Méliès ones, but I know there's ones for other filmmakers as well, and they don't always necessarily come out, you know, in the English-speaking world. They might be like French box sets or German ones, or I know there's here in Japan actually. There's a company that puts out this collection of surviving early silent Japanese films, and they're also kind enough to put English subtitles on them as well. But you wouldn't necessarily know about it unless you went out of your way. Yeah, so there's a wealth of stuff, even though so much of it apparently, like, there's some statistic like 50% of all films made in the first half of the 20th century don't exist anymore. Right. But there's still a lot of it. I mean, there's enough to engage you for a good long while, and I think people who might think, that's not for me, may find it a lot more energizing than blockbuster films today, and you should definitely give it a try. And this series, which you can see on YouTube, is a perfect starting point, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. I lost track of the number of times I either laughed out loud or was just enthralled by what I was
even
seeing.
if you're not planning to chase down, the leads, just in and of itself, you'll have a good time. But definitely, if you're a cineast of any sort, you will write copious notes, as I'm sure we both did, right?
I have like 10 pages of
At the very least, I'm pretty sure a certain Nicholas Ashirkan will be investing in the Starevich insect movie.
Absolutely.
If such a thing exists.
There was maybe I'm just gonna jump around in my.
Yeah, you go ahead. You take the floor because I think I've made my case. I think.
Well, one thing. So Muybridge, who kind of is the guy who invents before the film camera exists. He's the first person to take repeated photographs of like a horse running or a person walking, right? And that I had no idea he had murdered somebody. That was brand new because he comes up quite a lot when you study art history. Obviously, at a certain point, art history and film history kind of come together, right?
And photography as well, right? Because wasn't that it was like a bet or something, or do all four hooves come off the ground?
Yes, come on. Yeah. So that was his actual story, because as I said, I've seen the images countless times, but I don't know that I was ever told that he was possibly working through some weird trauma, because like he took so many of them, like every animal known to man he kind of filmed with his camera walking.
No, he clearly had some kind of like
mania almost.
Yeah, well, that's where a lot of this stuff is born out of, right? Is one man or woman's obsession at a certain point eventually breeds an industry, or part of an industry. Or
another note that I wrote down was that it says close-ups, an invention of pornography! ! Because at one point they talk about how like a lot of things were kind of shot in these static two shots, but in order to kind of raise the sexual tension, to like suddenly cutting to a woman's like ankle and her like sock being like that they didn't do those cutaways. There weren't close-ups before porn, and it makes me think about how many the internet, like there are numerous things where there's this secret history of how photography, how pornography has led or been a driving force in the innovation in most art forms.
The little head leads the big head more often than you might think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a fact of, but it's a fact that history wants to kind of sweep under the rug and not deal with, but in actual fact, Yeah,
well, I think I think we always all right. We've learned that now, so we'll use that way of doing things going forward. But then going forward, you almost never repeat the same way of learning something, right? So it's
right.
Okay. You never know. You never know what's going to lead to like the best example I've ever heard, the best analogy, for instance, slightly off tangent, but like science for the sake of science, for example. The best analogy I've ever heard is, you could have given the best stove maker in the world millions and millions and millions and millions, endless amounts of money to create, the best stove, the best oven, and they never would have invented the microwave oven. Like that was just an accident of people working in radioscopes and stuff like that. Like, you never know, this branch over here is going to inform this branch over here, right? So pure science and play and innovation, and for the sake of it, should be encouraged, I think.
I have another note here. Just as 1897, the miller and the sweep. Two blokes beat the crap out of each other with objects in front of a windmill.
That's good. I want to watch that tonight.
Yes.
After watching Those Awful Hats again.
I mean, obviously it was one that just jumped out.
Oh, there's so many. I forgot to write some down because they come back. So yeah, there's so many. Well, what happened there now? It's like, yeah, just amazing images. Just amazing images.
And then like staged fires, like the firemen movies, you know, like, or like the guy overcome by the smoke and then the guy breaking in the window, like Backdraft, that crappy movie from the, you know, the 90s, like, you know, made in 1907 or something. Just, you know.
No, and I think as well, it's worth it to mention, because I think if there is any, and again, this is slightly after this time period again, or towards the tail end, so it's not even quite the same thing we're talking about, but if there are any enthusiasts of this nowadays, it tends to be in the realm of comedy, right? Silent comedy, like that still survived to a certain degree in terms of, you know, they teach it at film schools or young adults get into, but there was so much more going on than just comedy. I think that's the thing that people forget. There were other types of silent films being made. It wasn't just all Keystone Cops and people falling in buckets of water and stuff like that, right?
And speaking about what I loved was that the earliest crime movies were just recreations of, like, it was just a guy ripping off an old lady's handbag or a guy hitting another guy in the head with a wrench. You know, like there wasn't any kind of like moral. There was no detective in the story. It was just like, it's just a moment of crime. And I thought, like, this is like basically what Umberto Lenzi did. You know, he would just string, like, if you watch those Italian cop movies of the 70s, he would just string endless scenes of carnage and then occasionally cut back to Maurizio Merli in a mustache glowering at the police station. But the majority of the running time of the movie is actually just like society devolving into complete chaos, like as people just club each other in the streets.
1903, the great train robbery ending with the person firing the gun directly into the screen. It's bring me the head of Alfredo Garcia 70 years prior, you know. So it's, I mean, it's a real, I mean, I'd seen this series before, and this was still a revelation to me to watch it again and to be reminded. So yeah, even if you think you already know cinema history in and out, I would still recommend this. This series.
And I would love to see, you mentioned it before, I'd love to see the Musketeers of Pig Alley or whatever, if the whole thing still survives.
Yeah, no, you can get that, because I have actually seen that. You can, because I think it's on one of these W.D. Griffith sets. Because like we mentioned, there's a few giants that do it, like there's Méliès and there's W.D. Griffith, and there's a few other kind of you know, giants that have been given box sets and stuff over there. And actually, if you went looking, there's probably more than you might think. It's just, like I said, it's almost, unless you specialize in it, it's almost
it's almost like an underground, you know, like you get them tape traders, or, you know, they're not, it's not that, you know, you're not finding that box set at your Walmart, or you know,
but they do exist, and you can, you know, so it's not it's no longer like when I think when this series first aired, I think I wouldn't have been able to rush out and see all these things. But I would imagine you could even probably find this stuff on YouTube.
Right, streaming,
So you have no excuse, really. Go see those awful hats now.
Yes. There was one absolutely mad movie from the very last episode called Dream of a Rarebit Fiend.
Right, yes. I'm glad you brought this up.
And it took, well, first of all, I mean, Welsh rarebit is something that I'd like you to speak to right now and explain to the fine folks. As a Welshman,
that's melted cheese on toast.
Yes, a grilled cheese sandwich, basically, right?
Yeah.
Delicious. So did the Welsh invent them?
No idea.
Okay.
Sorry to be not as illuminating as you obviously expected me to be there.
Well, I just, you know, it's called Welsh rarebit, so I assume.
I'm guessing, maybe. Okay. Why not? Thank us anyway.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, but what was interesting about this, thank you for reminding me, because the one, I mean, obviously this series is contained to a certain degree, and it could have gone off in all sorts of different areas, and it manages to keep itself, fairly restrained, unlike us who go off on tangents all the time.
Yes.
But at one point, it's almost like it can't, and I'm wondering if this is a Gilliam thing, like it can't resist, is because that dream of a rabbit fiend is somehow linked to the Little Nemo in Slumberland comic.
Yes.
I have to admit, is something. I've heard of Little Nemo, and there's different animated versions and things over the years. But it's one of those things I think which is over the years has lost traction, and it really made me sit up and think about Little Nemo for the first time in my life. I think, like, actually seeing those original.
Oh yeah. That's the only way to read it, would be to see it in an oversized book.
Yeah.
Print.
Is Little Nemo been a part of your life? Because I have to admit, it hasn't been in mine.
Not a huge part, but when I was reading or getting into the kind of like who's the Crazy Cat would be another example of that. Those early, very interesting newspaper comics.
They're a little bit later, aren't they? Crazy Cat, a little bit later on, aren't they?
A little bit, yeah. But basically, the people who are really pushing the envelope of the form at the very beginning, right, are naturally going to be interesting. So, yeah. But I haven't read a huge amount, but I'm sure it'll be worth investing.
No, it certainly made me interested in. Because then as well, it also makes that even though whatever that film in the 90s was, there was like a French live action film, right? Like, even if that stuff isn't, I don't know if I have no idea if it's supposed to be any good or not. But, when you go back to the source and then looking at that, even if the adaptations are shit, it automatically makes the adaptations more interesting for you. Just to compare, right? So so I have that to thank this for as well. As I might finally actually go down the Little Nemo rabbit hole as well. So many things.
Well, you know what? Those guys at that Prolix Comics Bollocks, they could probably talk about that at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you, they're a bit sketchy. I don't really want to be talking. Did you see the way they drooled over Cutie Honey? And that
was very upsetting,
disturbing. But if you want to send them a mail, you go ahead. Yeah,
I might be able to.
I want nothing but clear blue water between me and those pervy losers.
I don't know if I have anything else to say, except what was interesting to me at the very end, the last part of the whole thing, it shuts down with these two cowboys.
Yes,
getting shot or something, getting killed by some indigenous folks, and then really intense powwow music playing over the whole thing, and I was just like,
it is a little.
I didn't quite know how to read it. I wasn't sure what the intent was.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what that was, because I even rewound it to see. Oh, maybe I need to hear Gilliam's last line, or did he say something profound along the line? Did he say something like, I don't know, like the wagons west of the cinematic world came and destroyed the indigenous film world.
Right, yeah.
Was there some tie-in? But they didn't seem to be. It was just suddenly, oh, what's this non sequitur of an ending? But as far as I can tell,
quite strange, because one interesting thing that they only barely touched on. I mean, it was such a broad purview of stuff they had to deal with. But one thing that they kind of, was the idea of anthropological, filmmaking, right? This is a time when people are going to Africa, they're going, and so, but strangely in the US and in Canada, some of the least racist films made about Indigenous Canadians and Indigenous North Americans were made during this time, when they just simply went out and observed, when they went out and just shot film of what people were doing, what their dances were. And it's not really until John Ford,
they had
good solid Irishman, comes to America and makes a bunch of racially motivated hate movies against like Stagecoach and stuff.
Or later on in the 30s, like when they go to Africa and like stage scenes where they get like pygmies to do hilarious things. Look at the little fellow dance, or that.
Yes,
kind of thing. Yeah.
But at this point, it's a more pure, and it's a more, I don't know, this democratic, and it's just kind of like, no, we're just going to set up the camera and film.
Yeah. Well, like you said earlier, it doesn't take long for the rot to set in, right? Like at first they're just observing the train come into the station. They're just observing indigenous cultures. It only takes 5 minutes for someone to, should we throw some sex into the mix and have that native rape a white woman or something, or sex it up a bit, and
yeah, I guess. And I think too, in the US case, it was they had decided to tell themselves a different story,
right?
Well,
wait a minute, Nick. Here we were celebrating this celebration of early cinema. Way to make to depress us all at the end there. But I suppose, life is tough, right? We shouldn't shy away from the realities.
Well, it is
Yes.
the ending of the last episode, but no,
but if you do want to escape into an earlier, purely joyous wonderland, go to YouTube. Go see the last. And if anyone is in a position to do so, please put this out on Blu-ray with supplementary material. And,
as many of those films as can be appended to the back,
or a website or something like that. Like you pay like a membership or something, or Anyway, there we go. That was your film crack up your crack for this month. It's month, isn't it? Yeah, I guess.
Yes, I think so. Yes, I believe so.
So, and I believe next time we've got some
Shark Week. I think it's Shark. I think it's Shark Week at Film Craic.
Nice. So until then, I've been Clive Davis, and my good friend has been
Nicholas O'Shea-Con.
Until next time, beware those awful hats.